Okay. All right, we are going to get started. Be good stewards of everyone's time. Dr. Holness is going to join us at about 7:15. He had another engagement, but he will join us as soon as he gets an opportunity. And so I will now call our October general membership meeting to order. Minister Edwards, if you would please.
Madam President, and to all assembled, let us go to the throne of grace. Most gracious, eternal God and Father, we thank you for yet another day, a day, God, that we've never seen before. And now, God, we thank you for this opportunity to gather in your name as we are about your business. God, your word tells us in all of our getting to get understanding. And we pray thee now that you would grant that we would get understanding as it pertains to education. God, help us to be woke. Help us, God, on this journey of justice, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. I like how you did that, Minister Edwards. We're praying for the wokeness. I like that now. Love that, love that. So, we have all, at the NAACP we've always been about education. We've always been about what is best for the children. And it seems, and let's speak specifically to Broward County School District, that for too many decades, our children have gotten the short end of the stick. And so, we've done the research, we've done several reports that have been filed, and we have worked for years. Much of it, as you know, was in vain until Mr. Runcie came. And as you know, the problem started when for Mr. Runcie as well, when Black children in particular, but also brown children began to be treated equally, began to be offered and allowed to get an equal education, not to be punished more harshly than their white counterparts. And I honestly believe that had Mr. Runcie not stood up for all of the children, even the Black and the brown ones, that he would, if he had wanted to be, he could still be here as superintendent, that the arrests and those things never happened. But even though it was, the threat was there for years before it actually happened, he always stood firm with the community. I wanted to, certainly I'm glad, and Dr. Osgood, who has worked with us from the moment she got on. Actually, she got voted in, and before she was actually sworn in, she wanted to know what was going on so we can step right in to make sure that we had a strong voice for our children, and got right into the fight. And so there were a couple of things that have happened in particular, and Dr. Holness will go over when he gets in. There was a lot of confusion at the education town hall meeting, which, by the way, was not Dr. Osgood's town hall meeting, but because of her work and her continuous support of the district and the children in this community, she appeared. Many of us on here were on there as well. We want to make sure that the correct information is given, certainly, to our community. Many of you, some had agreed to be at the town hall meeting. And there's always never enough people of us there. The problem is we don't go out and get the information. We don't go to school board meetings. We read stuff that's not true in some of the papers, and even if they're Black papers, they don't always have the facts. And so then we just start saying stuff. We were at state convention recently, and there were several folk who didn't have the facts, particularly when it came to banned books. And we certainly had invited the senator to participate, be a speaker. And I never know if it's going to be strictly the senator who's going to be speaking, or if it's going to be the reverend, or it is just going to be Roz up in there. And usually we get all three. And so when one of her colleagues over on the House side gave some misinformation, and I just looked and waited I was moderating to see which one was going to show up. Because when we get misinformation, it really hurts the community. And so, Doc, I know that you're at the airport, you're waiting to board a plane. But if you can share a little bit about where we are as far as education, and Doc will be in a little bit later. Senator Osgood.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, community. I apologize for my background noise. The Education Committee has already started meeting in Tallahassee. We came out the gate being blindsided with new cut scores. And so the increase in new cut scores is going to impact our school grades for the next school year. And it's not fair to implement those cut scores now, but that's what the state is doing. So we don't want to be alarmed by school grades. School grades go through a whole massive formula. And one of the key parts of it is the number of kids you have taken Algebra 1, geometry, and those advanced AP scores. With the state raising the cut score for that, it has the tendency to lessen the number of kids that are in those courses that will then in turn impact middle school grades. So I am working with Dr. Licata, Dr. Helpburn to continue to advocate to the Department of Education to at least allow the new cut scores to impact us in the 2025 school year, which will give schools a year to work toward those cut scores. Secondly, we have to continue to stay diligent about African-American history. There is a law that's been on the books since 1997 that requires school districts to teach African-American history. Last legislative session, there was a law passed to require school districts to report the teaching of African-American history. So let me quickly deal with book bans. The governor is saying that there is a book ban hoax. And the reason the governor is saying that, because if you challenge a book, the local school district has to pull that book, send it to a committee, and make a decision. So on the state level, they're not technically banning any books. In Broward County, I am aware of 3 books that have been taken off the shelf, and those books deal more with sexually inappropriate information being taught to elementary school kids. I am in support of those books being used in middle and high school and not elementary school. There are certain things we don't need to talk to our babies about too early about sex. There has not been any books by Black authors banned by the school district. But the other piece of this that you don't hear a lot about is you have powers to be in Tallahassee working with vendors or authors of books and getting them to make Rosa Parks lighter or take out certain terminology in order for the state to purchase the book or the book to be purchased. So we have to continue to do our due diligence and making sure that Black history is taught. I am working with my sorority on a state level where we've just launched an initiative to have a presence in school board meetings. And we're hoping that all the Divine Nine, all of our groups will join us. We need to increase the Black presence at school board meetings, even if we're just there and not speaking. We need to send a clear message that we are watching and we're going to hold the state accountable and districts accountable when it comes to Black kids. We can no longer just show up after the fact. So if you are retired, even if you're not Black, I know that there are many people that just care about kids. And when we look at the data right now of what's going on, a lot of Black and brown kids are being disproportionately impacted. Madam President, I didn't hear you say it, but I'm going to say it again. In Broward County, we have to monitor what's going on specifically with the Coral Springs and Coconut Creek Police Department, who is choosing to arrest our kids in school instead of giving them civil citation. So those are some of the things that we have to pay attention to. Thank you so much, Madam President, for this forum and for the NAACP's commitment to educating our kids. I was reading a book an hour ago, and it was talking about this breeding in Africa. And I haven't learned, Judge Holmes, the pronunciation of the African way to say it, but it's simply they greet each other by saying, "How are the kids?" And then you respond. Just think about if we start greeting ourselves, "How are the kids?" And the proper response would be, "The kids are well." My response tonight is the kids are not well. And the systems are trying to make things even more egregious for our kids. But we're not going to allow it to happen on our watch.
So let me ask you, Doc. So you said that the school, we shouldn't be as worried this first year with the grading issue. So if you're a principal and you're already, trying to make sure that your school did better, but maybe they were on the line there, how should they be? What concern should they have?
So the scores are we're going to have more in DF schools. I just want to be honest about that because they're implementing the cut scores now. You normally do that and you start counting them the following year because you give the district time to adjust to it. They're not doing that. Remember, they got away with from high stakes testing. So they're doing what Broward has always been doing is progress monitoring, which is good because you're able to monitor a student and know where they are instead of waiting until the end of the school year and finding out they're not doing well. But the cut score is requiring higher scores. And what we are particularly concerned about is middle school. The kids will ultimately reach the higher scores, but you have to give the district time to implement strategies and the teachers time to work with the kids to get there. If you come out the gate this year with it, with the new measurement, we've missed the summer. We've missed the transition last year from 5th grade to 6th grade, from 6th grade to 7th grade. So we're going to have to just continue to work to support our schools, not to attack them, but to hold them accountable and support them, which means we need to think about giving an hour to some school, talking seriously with principals to see how we can help, making sure organizations that get a lot of money for kids like the Children's Service Council, the Boys and Girls Club, that they're working and supporting schools based on what they need. We're not interested in just babysitting kids after school. For example, if Walker needs more help with reading, then those after school programs should be focused on reading in those kids that need that help. But it is a concern. I'm just being honest. Unless they decide to give us the moratorium to 2025, the middle school grade scores are going to go down for our schools. We'll have more in DF schools next year, not because people are not teaching and learning, but because the cut score was increased on the state level.
And so you and I were both in Miami-Dade at their education town hall meeting. And I believe a few of the teachers from Broward County expressed their concern or their fears about teaching accurate African-American history. The district, based on what I heard last week, seemed to be lying about the clarity of what could and can't or shouldn't be taught. Is that where you're finding? I know several of those were your sorority sisters as well. Others were BTU. Are you finding, because I'm not, I have, many educators in my family, and they're not clear on what it is that is not and is supposed to be taught when you're talking accurate African-American history.
So a lot of times what happens with state policy and media is there's a spin on interpretation. So if you're an educator, it's just like any other profession. You have to be true to your profession. So teachers are committed to teaching truth. They should be committed to teaching truth. So HB 7 says that you should not teach anything that makes someone uncomfortable or cause psychological distress for something that's happened in the past. So if you're teaching me that you lying on my ancestors and you're teaching me that Black people benefited from slavery, as a Black person, that should make me uncomfortable. And it should be something that causes me psychological distress. So I think that our teachers need to move forward. And then a lot of this stuff, Madam President, we're going to have to challenge in court.
We cannot just start doing what's wrong because we are afraid to stand up for what's right. If a teacher is fired for teaching African American history accurately, then that's why we encourage everybody to pay their membership dues and be a part of great organizations like the NAACP, that we can have their back and sue the state and support those teachers that are doing the right thing. A lot of this stuff is about fear and intimidation. And then they laugh at us because we begin to acclimate to rumors of what we're hearing, and then we start injuring ourselves. There is a law. So there is a law, a 1997 bill, and I'm sorry, I don't know the bill number off the top of my head, that require you to teach African American history. So you're required to do that. And when you are a teacher, you have to be true to your profession. We know Black people didn't benefit from slavery. We know that slavery did not increase by natural reproduction. We know that women were beat and breeded, and that there were laws that said every slave mother that had a child, the child would be born a slave because of the mother, not the dad, because oftentimes the master was the dad. But that's how they continue to keep Black people in slavery. We know from history with the Ocoee massacre and those massacres that those massacres was caused by white people brutally murdering and attacking Black people. So we have to stay true to our history. We can't let somebody intimidate us and make us teach what's wrong, because then if you teach in lies, you can also lose your job. So it's a catch-22. And it's why we should encourage and support our teachers who are grossly underpaid. Right now, we have a 7,000 teacher shortage in the state of Florida, which means many of our children will go through the school year with multiple substitutes. We should not be okay with that. These are the kinds of things that we should be addressing on the state level. It's not something the school district can handle. We should email the governor, all the senators, everybody in the House of Representatives, and say we're not okay with our public schools not having adequate funding and having laws that's running people away from that profession.
So we do need to get together along with Judge Holmes and also one of our good friends and life members, Bobby Dubose, who worked with us before on getting some things passed. And I think we're going to rely on you to get the other side to buy in. But we do need to have a conversation soon, when it comes to educating our children. And I do know we are owed a meeting, Judge Holmes, with the general counsel of the school district there, school board it is, because it's she is telling people whatever she wants to hear, whatever they want to hear, and that ain't working for us. And so we do want to get certainly the lawyers involved. Somebody asked what can they do regarding the arrest at Coconut Creek and Coral Springs. Then we're going to have to, we don't have any friends on Coconut Creek City Commission there. I can tell you that one of the gentlemen who ran for state attorney in 20 claimed not to know that his city leads the state of Florida in arrest. And primarily, of course, they're Black children and will not. And there's this, and so when people say, oh, arresting, we're thinking about, crimes, major crimes. We're talking about, just juvenile behavior. We're not talking about guns or knives and any violent crimes or those things. So don't get it twisted. That's not really what's happening. But we do need to, and Patty Lynn, I thank you for that question. Coral Springs, let me just tell you, the state attorney did, by statute, is required to submit a civil citation program for the circuit. He did that, not to what all that we wanted, but he did do that because there was not one prior to. SATS didn't do it, and I think Judge Holmes brought it to everyone's attention about how we were out of compliance with statute for several years, and so it was done. And Coconut Creek could care less. Coral Springs could care less. And, sometimes Plantation, they're getting ready to have a new police chief. And so we have to be concerned about that as well. We've had plenty of police chiefs that have changed. And so we have got to get people in office who care about all of our kids. Just saying that, all of the kids, not just the ones that don't look like me. But we will certainly, Padeline, we would love to have you in the discussion when it comes to our children so that they can all be treated the same. Your staff said it's SB 804, Senator. And Julie's always right on. She is always right on there. We do have a friend in the mayor of Plantation. Until he shows me different, I will go with that. But we do need to make sure that we get a police chief over there who understands that all of the children are important, even the ones who look like me. Let's see, I think I saw Doc for about 5 minutes. So we're waiting for him to come back on. So that while we're waiting for him. And so when they have, Dr. Osgood mentioned the school board, we can't sit around and be home. The agendas come out, I don't know, several days before, and I know they change at the last minute sometimes, but for the most part, it's out there. So we've got to go to the school board meetings. There has to be something on there that says dealing with our kids that you care about. When I was there, I think last week, and it was on the 17th, I was there, and it was probably, and they were talking about promise, and which affects mostly thousands and thousands of Black children. And let me guess, that we're not staff, folk that we're not staff, and that we're there to talk about promise, and that we're Black. I'm gonna say 2, me being 1. There were others that were there to talk about other things, and there was staff. But you can't sit around and not watch the meetings, not go to the meetings, and not give comments on there, not talk to your school board, and just read stuff that's not really true, repeat stuff that's not true, and consider yourself, a true advocate for children, because it doesn't work like that at all. We really have to be advocates for our children. Otherwise, we go back to where we were before. And so let's talk about, since Doc is popping on and off, he's perhaps having problems here. Let's talk about Parkway Middle, which was the topic of our school at our education meeting, town hall meeting, which if you weren't there, then we're not, unless you watch it, you really don't get informed about what's really happening, what's not. And so the question is, where are we now when it comes to Broward Estates and Parkway Middle? So while we've let Dr. Holness figure out where he's going, Judge, if you can check and make sure when he gets back on to let us know, it'd be great. So where we are now, as staff explained, I know you've been gone, but I know that the arrows were pointed at you for being on the stage, for still caring. But I know that I'd hear you talk about a number of meetings. There were community meetings held. So let's talk about Broward Estates and what is and what isn't happening over there until Dr. Holness comes back on. Go ahead, Doc.
Sure, Madam President, and I'm going to be very transparent. Before I left the school board, I made an attempt to have community conversations about merging Broward Estates and Parkway. And many people kind of thought that I was losing my mind. The community decided that they did not want to do it. The reason I was making that recommendation is because, as I shared during that time with all the meetings, we started before COVID, we came back after COVID, is Broward Estates is a school that's built to house about 700 kids. Right now in Broward County, there's only about 296 kids bounded to Broward Estates. So if all of the students bounded to Broward Estates went to Broward Estates, it still would not meet the capacity of the school. Right now, we have enrolled maybe about 175 students. So looking futuristically and hearing and understanding this attempt in Tallahassee to have us share those facilities with charter schools, I thought that if we combine the schools, we could go to a pre-K through 8 model, and then we could build out the gifted program that's tucked uniquely in Parkway. The community voted not to do that. So after the community decided that they didn't want that, I then worked with the school board to move forward with the building project for Parkway. Now, a part of that process that delayed the building project for Parkway was me. I was not happy with drawings and recommendations from staff to renovate 2 buildings at Parkway that I felt very strongly should be pushed down and rebuilt. So after we vetted it, after I got the superintendent involved, brought it to the board's attention, they agreed to push those buildings down and build new buildings, which meant that the job had to be rescoped. You had to do a lot of revisions that took time. So that process took place while I was on the school board. As I was transitioning, I worked with the board members at that time to ensure the funding. So they approved the funding in the budget under Cartwright, and then they came back after Cartwright and actually allocated the money, which is now $41 million. Initially, it was only maybe about $10 million in the budget for Parkway. So the community always have conversation about them being promised things and not getting them. And they're absolutely right. Mr. Ben Williams worked really hard to have 2 phases of a project at Parkway. He got 1 phase completed, and in 2008, the state pulled the funding from the district and there was no money to complete phase 2. I don't think that the district was able to communicate to the community at that time that the state had taken that funding. So by the time Mr. Runcie came and I came to the board, we were at a new place and we did not have funding. And that's why we went out to the community for a bond referendum to get the funding, because the state wouldn't give us the money. So now that project is moving forward at Parkway. They have 2 or 3 different designs that they're vetting through the community to choose. Those new buildings being built, a new building for administration, because the current administration building doesn't have a single point of entry, and it's $41 million. I commend Dr. Holness for continuing the vision and the plan, for his work that he's doing on it. He's gotten a commitment from Dr. Licata, where Dr. Holness even took Dr. Licata over there and added a commitment to get covered walkways at Parkway, which we don't have now. So there's been a lot of attention given to Parkway. There is funding in the district's DEFP plan now for Parkway, and we have to continue to monitor and support Dr. Holness as he sees that project through.
Thank you, Dr. Holness. I know you're running around today, so we thank you. And I want to just say from the rip, since Dr. Holness has taken the reins, he has met with any of the community, anyone who wants to meet and have a conversation, he's open to it. And so even whether you agree or not agree, he's open to the dialogue. And hopefully, if you have something positive to say, or some good ideas, he wants to hear them, particularly when it comes to our kids. So Doc, we were talking about, we started talking about the town hall meeting. That was not Dr. Osgood's town hall meeting, but as soon as they came in, the arrows started to come, and it really, I think, took away from where you were trying to go. So I wanted to let's start with the conversation. That where Dr. Osgood left off. She transitions, you come in, you hit the ground running, and in particular as it pertains to Broward Estates and Parkway. Let's talk about what you've done and what you plan to do.
Okay, thank you so much, Madam President, and I thank everyone who's here on the panel and also those who are listening. Well, you know, the intent of the town hall for Parkway, we had several intentions. One was to update the residents on the rebuilding of Parkway, and as Dr. Osgood mentioned initially, they wanted to renovate those buildings. At the time when Dr. Osgood was the school board member, she advocated that we have new buildings. And so this is where we are. Funding is there now for the new buildings, which is over $40 million. So the purpose of the town hall was really to meet with the residents to go over the timeline as far as the building of the new buildings at Parkway, and to also discuss other areas such as how we can become an A district, not just for some districts, but for District 5 as well. So we wanted to have like Dr. Hepburn there from the Teaching and Learning, Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, to give us some updates on how we're going to become an A district. Madam President, it was, I believe it was a very informative meeting, and I appreciate the questions that the residents had. And I believe we did the best we could to answer those questions. And we also left information for any follow-up questions. And any member of the public that need information, please send those questions and concerns to Jeff Holness at browardschools.com. So in terms of Parkway, for those who weren't there, they have different phases, and the timeline should be up to the end of 2027 when construction will be completed. So in the first phase, which is taking place now, we're looking at procurement, RFP, hire designer, engineer. We're then going to later on look at design completion and then permitting. And from there, construction starts, and construction will take about 2 years, which will put us to the end of 2027, where Parkway will have new buildings. Now, in addition to that, Madam President, we saw the need for covered walkways at Parkway, and I had the superintendent tour Parkway Middle School to look at the areas where covered walkways are needed. And we have gotten commitment that we will at first have temporary covered walkways at Parkway. And then in the next budget cycle, my hope is that we can get permanent walkways. But I would say with the rebuilding of Parkway as well, I also encourage that we have covered walkways in different areas once the building is completed. So students, we don't have that concern going forward. I'd also like to mention that the Lauderhill Commission also indicated to me that they would appreciate having school resource officers at Parkway and Lauderhill 6 through 12. I strongly rather advocated for that. And now we have a school resource officer at Parkway Middle School as well as Lauderhill 6 through 12. And Madam President, this was after the budget cycle ended and we had to find funds in order to do that. So I pushed strongly and I was able to accomplish that. In fact, the superintendent told me that last minute he had to run upstairs and sign the paperwork in order to get that done. And so I was so happy when I went over there to see the police officers, the SROs there at Parkway Middle School, as well as Lauderhill 6 through 12. And even Commissioner Jabot indicated how grateful the city is that we did provide that.
Yeah, that's pretty important. When I found out that Lauderhill had absolutely no SROs, I was, and I said, well, why would that be? Because you got, there is a need, and especially in some of the areas. And they said, well, we can't afford it. And so they were able to work. They're going with the Guardians, but the last time I saw our Guardians job description, it was a lot different than a school resource officer. And so that's certainly a step in the right direction. And let me ask you, there was on the presentation, they talked about the declining of enrollment in Broward Estates. So I know that one of the strategies that the state and charters and others have undertaken is to start with one school. That actually, when during Mr. Runcie's era, they had wanted to take the 5 F schools. They were all our traditionally Black schools, And they went around the community trying to share the information and what the strategy was, writing a plan. Because once they come in, they start commandeering our schools, then they don't stop, and they'll end up like Jefferson County, where they started with a few, and now they're all, they're no longer public schools in Jefferson County. The realism of the declining student population at Broward Estates, they're just above 200 now. Should this continue, what's the probability of them being able to remain unless one of the other plans is, or the other plan is adopted?
Okay, well, Madam President, as the Senator mentioned, Senator Osgood, they're even having talks now in Tallahassee regarding low enrollment schools to have charter school options for those schools. And so it is very concerning. And I understand that initially when the conversation started a few years ago, when Senator Osgood spoke to the community and they did not want to have a K-8 at the time, I believe that with the new information coming down, I believe the community might be more open to have discussions on it, because the consequences are too grave not to take action. So at this time, considering that we may have charter schools replacing these low enrollment schools, I believe it's important that the community engage in discussions, and we intend to do that as well, to have candid conversation with the community as to how we move forward. And we have to move forward in a manner where we can utilize the space, for example, at Broward Estates. If we don't have enough children to attend the school, then maybe we can bring in some other options in there along with our current elementary students. But these are conversations that we have to have. And I want to caution everyone out there. There has been, because I've heard it, Madam President, where and individuals have called me as well regarding that our school will be closed, or this specific school will be closed. There has been no discussion and no confirmation on any school closing. They are looking into the possibility of repurposing schools, and the board members had brought that up to repurpose 5 schools this year. We haven't had a conversation which schools will be repurposed. We haven't had a conversation what the repurpose means in terms of what will we do with those schools. So I don't want the community to panic or to be in high alert as to which schools and if any of the schools will be closed. But I do, however, strongly suggest that the community is open to having conversations, especially with schools that are significantly low enrollment, because the state will start to look at ways in which they can use those schools for other things, such as charter schools. So I don't believe that's what the community wants. So I think moving forward, we should have open dialogue as to what will be the best options, and we will be having those meetings. In fact, I spoke at the Broward Estates HOA recently, and we've had those conversations. But it will be ongoing conversations as to what are the options and what will the community accept as far as moving forward. So I am looking forward to those.
Yeah, I remember when the conversations were had with the 5 schools that were on the block and before. And I remember going and seeing Dr. Osgood with her collar on, because it got rough up in there, and it was us talking about us. So you might have to get a doctor, put a little collar on and come on, because it was eye-opening of what some of the folk thought of our kids and thought what really was going to happen without having all the information. Doc.
Yeah, I just want to make a point. The school is under enrolled because of the lack of babies. Our community is aging. So I just want to make that point, because we have people that work really, really hard in our school district every day. I see Dr. LaWanda Wright-Hines, who leads up our Title I department, and they are working on a whole nother level to help our kids. But when you look at the fact that you have Rowdy State, MLK, Lottdale, Walker, Thurgood Marshall, and Norfolk, all within like a 7-mile radius. So there's not an actual number of babies. And remember I said earlier that there are 296 students bounded to Broward Estates. So if every one of those students went to Broward Estates, it would still not meet the capacity of the school. Now, the good news is, Dr. Holness, is you're going to experience the phenomenal power of our community. It was rough repurposing our schools, but this community came together. We had all hands on deck and we repurposed our schools. We didn't allow them to close. We ended up with Arthur Ashe that provides job training and development for our community, in our community. People don't have to take 4 buses to Davie or to Coconut Creek. So when we're faced with these types of challenges, as a community, we have shown what Black excellence is. We've exemplified collaborative excellence. And so I believe in Dr. Holness. I believe in our president, others that have continually worked with the school district like Patty Lynn, Judge Holmes. This is the time when we're at our best. When we come together as churches, as organizations, as individuals, grandmothers, moms, or just people that care about kids. And we collectively have conversations and make recommendations on what's best to be done with our schools. So I am encouraged that this community, once again, is going to show the power of this community and the love for our kids as we work together to do something with Broward Estates and not allow the powers to be in Tallahassee to swither in charter schools and private schools in our community that's not going to take our kids or embrace our community. They'll come in and they'll set up their little isolated area and begin to infect our community and disrespect us and disregard all of the hard work and tears that we have gone into it. And I just wanted to be clear because I get very upset when people bash our hardworking people that work in the schools, especially the District 5 schools, because they're working harder than anyone else in the district, the people that's running Title I programs, and they just don't get the credit and recognition that they deserve. So it does bother me when I hear people make strange comments and accusations against them, because I know firsthand how they're working way beyond anything that we could ever pay them to do because they care about kids. And Dr. Holness, I will go on record and take the moment to brag again on Thurgood Marshall and Lottdale, whose grades improved during COVID, and what's going on at Endeavor right now with the amazing results that they've gotten in math and reading in those schools.
And so we have to make sure we celebrate that. First of all, that we become aware of that, and then realize that, you know, it takes some very special people to work with our families and with our kids. And so we have to make sure that we recognize that not everybody who reads can teach. You know?
Yes, and that, Madam President, I'd like to also mention, because I know the community has always had concerns that to make sure that we engage them in any decision-making process. So any type of repurposing, any type of decision-making, we will involve the community. They do not need to worry about that. I know that there's conversations in the pipeline regarding closing schools, and I've heard it over and over, but we're not going to have that. We're not going to move forward with any of that unless we have community input. And I don't know of any closing of schools. I know of repurposing of schools. Now, I just also like to indicate the power of the community, because when I had the town hall, I remember one lady came up and she said, well, you know, what about adult community school? The Parkway Community School was closed or is not as active. How about we have adult community? And I believe she might have been referring to Broward Estates and Parkway Middle. So though we will look at the community's input and we will value those input, we will also bring our suggestions as well and concertedly make decisions on how we move forward, because I think we are a team. We will not work in isolation. We will work together. And I appreciate the input that we will get, and we'll continue to take more inputs. I've heard inputs regarding possibly expanding ESC or expanding our early childhood program, stuff like that. So we will look at everything, and we will continue to meet with the community before we make any decisions regarding repurposing any schools or even closing. And I haven't heard anything about closing.
let me just tell you that we heard maybe in the last 2 weeks of school, our state president remembers, when being started a similar community school. She taught there years ago. That school went from, oh, it's the worst in Miami-Dade to a charter school is taking over that school. And that just, just lets you know how they're just lurking and planning. And then they bash, and then they say, oh, the kids aren't learning, it's all that. And then they come in, they have the magic bullet to put their charter school in there. So, there are a lot of us who do believe that the white man's ice is colder, if we're going to talk about it. So they'll slide over there. But a lot of I'm sure there are some good charter schools. There are many that are not, but the masses are not going to go there. So our job is to make sure that we advocate for the masses, and certainly within our public schools, so they can get a high quality free education there.
And Madam President, I just want to mention something really quick to echo what Dr. Osgood said, because a lot of these principals and leadership and teachers within District 5, they work very hard. In fact, I just visited Royal Palm Elementary this week. And one of the challenges they encounter is really just attracting teachers, because the challenges might be more because we may be dealing with kids with economic hardship and so on and so forth. And so it becomes a little bit more challenging for those teachers and so on. But to echo Dr. Osgood, these individuals working in District 5, they're working very hard. The principals are working hard, the APs, the coaches, the teachers, and so we have to commend them. It's not an easy job, and certainly they're not paid enough to do it. So I am just very grateful to them as well, because the work is difficult. So I appreciate all of the staff, all of the teachers, and our parents, because our parents, some of our parents have challenging situations, and they have to still try to be able to feed their kids, to be able to ensure that they succeed in school and so on. So our role is to just try to make that process easier as best we can.
Thank you. I wanted to there seemed to be a whole lot of confusion, Doc, about the resolutions that were there. And so there was one that came up that got pulled, and then there was yours, and then there was so tell us the purpose, tell us about your resolution and how we got here as far as your resolution on the African American history and regarding, as opposed to the other one, the original one that was pulled, yours.
Okay, so Madam President, I would like, if you would give me a couple of minutes, I'd just like to bring back the history of how this came about, right? Because, and I kind of not consider it my resolution. I was sort of revising a resolution that was presented that I had some concerns with. In March, a resolution came to us regarding teaching African American history, and this was in the month of March. This was before we had concerns that came about in July regarding the standards of teaching African American history coming out of Florida Department of Education, right? So when this resolution came to us in March, and I read it, I had several areas of concern. For one, the resolution was laced with the word compliance throughout the entire resolution. And not that we're, as a board, we're not going to be compliant, because in fact, we've recently voted that every resolution should have at the bottom of it that we're going to be compliant with Florida law. So when I see a resolution that has 7 or 8 different areas of it emphasizing compliance, it seems very redundant, and then it leads me to question why. When we do have at the bottom of each resolution that we're going to be compliant with Florida law. Now, resolutions are usually in great spirit to celebrate something, right? Like we have the African American History Month resolution, we have the Juneteenth month resolution, we have the Black Business Month resolution, and so on. But there is nowhere in the state of Florida that we know of, and this was done by my request of the district, where there is a resolution regarding teaching African American history. And there is no resolution that we know of in the state of Florida regarding teaching anybody's history, any other group's history. So when I see a resolution that emphasizes compliance, and I'll give you an example, Madam President, because I'm looking at the original resolution here that came to us in March. The resolution, I'll just read a couple parts of the original resolution, if you don't mind. And it says here, whereas our chief academic officer through the superintendent of schools has confirmed Broward County Public Schools, the nation's sixth largest school district, is in full compliance with all schools teaching African-American history. And then it says, whereas school board member Tori Alston joined the governor at a press conference on March 8, 2023, publicly sharing that Broward County Public Schools is in full compliance with state law regarding instruction of African-American history. And then it continues, whereas a bipartisan Florida House Bill 1213 was recently passed and signed into law in 2020, adding additional instruction requirement for African-American history. The bill requires all Florida students to learn about the Ocoee massacre, right? Now, and it continues with more and more compliance, right? So when I read that, and it also mentioned at the end of it that the School Board of Broward County strongly encouraged the district's Diversity Advisory Committee to engage with the Florida Department of Education African-American History Task Force for continued collaboration and sharing of information to enhance our instruction with Broward County Public Schools. Now, this was in March. So when it came to us in March, I had several concerns, and we actually revised it to bring it down to what it was when it was presented in August. And so when you look at this later on in July, we learned that there were Florida standards that came out of the Department of Education of Florida, right? That says that African-American history, African-Americans benefited from slavery, and that African-Americans were perpetrators of race riots, including the Ocoee, because that's mentioned in the standards as well, right? So this resolution came in March. In July, we have those standards that came about. And I just became very concerned with what this resolution means for all of us as African-Americans. And I did not see what the need was when we have an African-American History Month that we celebrate African-American achievements, accomplishments, and so on. So what was the intent of this resolution, and why is it laced with so many areas of it to be compliant with Florida law? Why is it mentioned in the Ocoee massacre, and in the state standards mentioned that Blacks are perpetrators of certain race riots, such as the Ocoee massacre and so on? So I just didn't like the way it came across. And I believe as a result, I pulled it in August for the community to take a look at the resolution and give their input. So Dr. Hepburn from the Department of Teaching and Learning, he engaged certain members of the community to look at it and to provide further revision. And that's what had happened. Now, many in the community also felt that there should have been a town hall for the community itself, not just the community leaders, to discuss the resolution and see where they want, how they would feel, or what would make them more comfortable, in terms of further revision. So when it came back to us, Madam President, after a few community leaders look at it, I still had further suggestion on revising it. So it came back to us with, instead of 7 or 8 areas of compliance, it came back to us with, I think, 3 areas of compliance. So I made a motion to remove the 3 areas of compliance, because at the bottom of every resolution, it shows that we're already being compliant. And so when I made that motion, I got it failed 5-4. 4 board members voted along, 3 voted along with me to make it 4, and 5 voted against removing the paragraphs that had compliance requirements in there. And so the final, after my motion failed, it went back to the original resolution, which passed 7-2, and I was one of the board members who voted against moving forward with it. It was 2 of us that voted against moving forward with that resolution. So those are the concerns that I have, and I just don't think with major concerns that we have today, Madam President, with our churches looking at teaching African-American history because of how they feel about the standards coming out of Tallahassee, with even our African American Research Library. I believe our manager of the African American Research Library is providing history lessons on Saturdays that I think might help to provide more accurate history as far as African American history. And I believe many in our community are very concerned about it. Now, as a school board member, I have to comply with state law, right? I have to follow the law in terms of what should be taught, but I just don't feel that it is, if the community has concerns with specific state laws, that it would be something that we should be celebrating. I think it would be imperative of us to get community concerns and input if we're going to put a resolution in place to comply with teaching African American history. So that's my rationale for the decisions that I made regarding that.
Yeah, because being compliant doesn't mean that you necessarily agree with it. You don't have to, say that, and certainly in a resolution. I think that was, designed as a signal to the governor that, you guys are all in with his stuff. And we know we're not on the same page for the most part. Doesn't mean that you're not going to follow it, just means that is, you're not going to celebrate it either. Judge Holmes, you had a question? Go ahead. And while we were doing
Dr. Holness, good evening. I
Good evening.
apologize for I'm having some internet difficulty here, so I want to make sure I can stay on.
Okay.
When you say that the resolution was sent out for input by the community leaders, who were they and who picked them?
Okay, so Dr. Hepburn engaged some members of the community. I believe Public Defender Gordon Weeks was one of the community leaders he engaged. I believe it might be, and don't quote me on it, but I believe Harold Pryor as well might have been engaged on it. I don't think Madam President gave an input on it. Did you, Madam President?
I was not asked. And
Okay.
I think that they were, as I recall, I don't think that that either the state attorney or the public defender weighed in, as I recall, either.
Okay, so my understanding was that there were community leaders that were engaged regarding the discussion of it. I don't know if the community leaders were the ones who further made the change, but I believe there were directions to have the community provide input on the resolution. So I believe that we could get more community input on it. I believe that maybe it would have helped if we had beyond community leaders, maybe community residents as well. So I still feel that this particular resolution needs further discussion from the community. And I believe the only way it can come back, Madam President, is if someone on the winning side of the vote bring it back. I was on the losing side, so I can't bring it back. But I would really love to have it come back so we can engage the community more in giving their input, because that's what we're here for, right? Is to serve the community. So I believe that the community input on it is very, very important. This is not Jeff Holness speaking. This to give my take on it. I want to hear what the community has to say, because I know the concerns with the standards that we are hearing of how African-American history should be taught, and the reporting aspect of teaching African-American history in terms of accountability of teaching it according to the new standards from the Department of Education. So I think a resolution like this should be should have immense community input. And I'm not sure if we had accomplished that. So I would love to see it come back, and I would love to see a discussion with the community as to how to revise it so it can be more accepted in the community, or if they don't want it at all, So I just think it would be.
Dr. Holness, let me interrupt you, because I want to stop this.
Yes.
How can someone who, at the time we had a town hall at Piney Grove, he had only been over here for 2 weeks. He didn't know anything and anybody. Then he picks 2 lawyers who are young. They're not historians. So when you get bad input, you get bad output.
Right.
They are not representative of the community. We got historians, older people who lived through these things in Florida. We got Dr. Hobbs at the African American Research Library. So I'm just saying,
by the way,
when you don't get the right input, you know, that's what happens. And the people who were in opposition to it, I mean, people that were for it rather, they hear this bad input and they say, okay, we're okay. 2 Black people looked at it and life is good. So I'm just saying in the future, the school board has to be more far reaching and getting people. I like Gordon and I like Harold, but they're young people. They don't even know. Okay. Please excuse me, but I just get riled up when I hear we got somebody to speak for us. That's why we got the term African American when Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton got together. I'm still Black. So, you know, I don't use that term. It's Black History Month, not African American History Month. So please excuse my indignation, but I'm just incensed when I hear that somebody who is really not representative of our community is speaking for our children and what they learn. They're not educators, they're lawyers.
Right.
Okay. And I'm a lawyer. That's why I can say that.
Yes. And Judge Holmes, I appreciate that input. And in fact, when the resolution came back and I saw the end product of the revised product, I had a lot of concerns with the revised product, and I realized that we do need far more extensive input, and I totally agree with you. So I tried to fight last minute to see if I could accomplish more parts of the revised version, revised further. Unfortunately, I wasn't successful. It was a 5-4 vote. On that. But I do agree with you that we should have had a more in-depth approach in having the community involved in revising it further. And it has been revised significantly from what it started off with in March, but it needed to be revised a lot more. And I totally agree with you that we should have had far deeper input from extensive members of the leadership within our community, as well as the community itself.
Thank you. Senator Osgood.
So Jeff, you know I love you. I love all of y'all. And I'm basing this on almost a decade of experience. There should not have been a resolution at all. The district already has an African American history resolution to celebrate African American history. The district has hundreds and hundreds of resolutions. It's not possible to get the community input on those resolutions. This particular resolution was strategically bought by someone who's doing the governor's bidding. And what we should be doing right now is monitoring to see if we're gonna have a similar resolution that speaks to Holocaust history, Asian American history, and all the other histories, or is it just African American people that are being targeted with this particular resolution about being in compliance? Because if this is the only one the school board is going to bring, then Madam President and Madam Attorney, we need together to have the NAACP's legal people sue the district for targeting African Americans with this particular resolution. There's an African American history resolution already on the books. It's been there even for when Mr. Williams was there. House history is one there for Muslim history, and so forth and so forth. So now that we got this new one that we don't need, that's brought by a particular individual, Mr. Alston, and that crew that's doing the governor's bidding, we need to not let it divide us. Dr. Blackburn did try to reach, Dr. Helpburn did try to reach people in the community, but let's face it, he's staff. He has no power over board members. I couldn't even believe that that resolution went forward. I expected for the board to say, we don't need this, and to vote it down and have it just go away. Staff can't make that decision. All they can do is try to have conversation. But when board members have agendas, like these board members did, they push this crazy stuff forward. So we need to make sure that they do it for Holocaust history, Asian American history, Muslim history, and so forth, or we need to respond legally as to why African American history is being singled out. And Dr. Holness, I know that puts you in a hard spot because you are a board member, but this community is very important to us. And I will never sit back and allow our people to be targeted in any kind of way, even if it comes down to suing the state. This is just wrong. It shouldn't have even been a topic of discussion, but it's a specific agenda why it's coming forth. And we need to shut it down, and we need to speak to the people that's bringing it forth. It is very heartening to me that when I was on the school board, and even now, I work real hard to be accountable to this community. And although we love each other, we don't always agree. So how do we let people just continue to serve? I don't care what color the skin that they are, and we don't hold them accountable. We don't call them to this meeting and ask them why they brought forth that resolution. It just doesn't make sense to me. And it's very hurtful to our community because it's setting us up with this stuff that the governor is doing. And we can't miss that. And I'm saying that from being in Tallahassee. So maybe, Madam President, you'll consider getting with Judge Holmes, and maybe the NAACP can send a letter of inquiry to see when the Holocaust history resolution, the Asian American history resolution, the Muslim history resolution are gonna come forth in a similar format like this one did, so that we can make sure that the school board being consistent in what they're doing and not just targeting our community.
Okay,
I
and
agree. I had the conversation with the superintendent last week. All these lies that's coming out of the dais have got to stop. You know, people are just saying stuff, you know, and our next topic, when we go into promise, it was clear that many of those board members, obviously not you, Dr. Holness, had not even read promise. They were just on a mission to, you know, to do the governor's bidding. So a lot of lies and misinformation is coming from the dais. There was a Brenda Pham was on the she was on the phone, and she was giving misinformation, lying about the effects of diversion on a kid's life. Now she says she's an attorney. She must have been out of the courtroom for a long time, because that is not true on how these things affect children. But again, misinformation and never even reading a promise. And so though we you know, are continuing the fight, the board decided to end promise, which, and they said that the services could be there, but they would end mandatory promise. So what that means is the reason it was in policy. The reason promise rested in policy was to make it, you shall into the, you know, give these kids an opportunity rather than turning them over to police. You know, it was there prior to going into policy. And you're saying, please, kind sir, and please, ma'am, please give all the children the same opportunity to be disciplined the same way if necessary. But what we had was, based on the not only DJJs, but even the district's own data, was that when it came to Black children in particular, they had one answer in most cases, and it was the police. So the district had turned the discipline of our children, Black children, over to law enforcement, and they just have one answer. Those were for Black children with handcuffs. And so the promise as we knew it in policy is gone. Allegedly, the services are still there, which means they could or could not. Tell me what the vote, that was my assessment of the vote. Tell me what your assessment of the vote was, Dr. Holness.
okay, so thank you, Madam President, and I just like to quickly mention as well that regarding Dr. Hepburn, that, you know, the leadership as well had kind of directed him to get input. So I know he's fairly new, and I'm sure he'll catch up to speed. But I think he did it in the best, what was in the best capability of him in terms of his experience here in Broward. So I would say he was under direction and he proceeded the best way he saw that he could. But it should have been a lot more in depth. Now, regarding promise, I would, when the discussion came up, Madam President, my main concern, and I've questioned the district leadership. Well, and if you look back on the meeting, I questioned, well, when we remove promise, what's the alternative? And I felt like I did not get a very clear answer as to the alternative. We got promise that there will be a great program after promise, but we don't know what that is. It's in the developing stage, it's in the discussion phase. And so as a result, I just did not feel that it would be a wise decision to vote to remove promise when there is not an alternative presented that is already developed and ready to be executed to replace promise. What we've had in the discussion is that we're ending promise, and after ending promise, we're going to look to work on something else. I would have much rather see that we worked on something else, and if it is comparable to promise or even better, then we could look at what we do with promise. But to remove promise and then to say to the residents and to the community that we're now going to look at something else to replace it, I just didn't think that would have been the best path forward. So I voted to keep promise. And as you have concerns, Madam President, I have concerns as well, because before promise, there was an unusual amount of, significant amount of our children, especially African-American children, that were being arrested. And now that we're removing promise, it is concerning as to whether or not that trend will start to happen again. So I voted to keep it because of those reasons, because of my concerns with students being arrested, and because I didn't see where we had a program in place to replace promise that would be similar or better. Yeah.
Well, you don't know because there isn't one. But, again, we have the disciplinary matrix because children were being disciplined differently for the same infraction. The ones on the east side, which is where our Black schools are, they were being arrested, suspended, and expelled. And then out west, they get a call home to mom and dad, and then nothing. There is a severe problem with underreporting incidences. And if we were to check, and the district were to check and allow our school leaders and our teachers to have a conversation, a frank conversation, they would tell you, and I've worked with several over the years with our disciplinary matrix, the school board's disciplinary matrix committee and school code of conduct committee, and they would tell you that, it's not that our kids are just so much more horrible and doing all these things, it's just they go underreported at the other schools. And so services, meaning, and a lot of promise not only stopped, was aimed at, stopping the arrest, suspension, expulsion, but allow folk to just take a breath, not let, if it's my kid to, and when we talk about, they always talk about crimes and danger. Promise was designed to deal with folk who were, it was kids being kids. It has nothing to do with violent crimes or anything like that. We had folk where it was a child running in the hallway. Child runs in the hallway at William Dandy. That was considered, depending on which officer showed up in Fort Lauderdale at one time, it meant disorderly conduct, which meant it was arrestable. It meant if you we had babies also being, out of custody, but arrest records nonetheless. Children with disabilities. The little girl said, he punched me or he touched me and hurt my arm. So the little girl shows the law enforcement officer, shows the school resource officer it does look a little red. Yeah, he probably did it. And then, there's a submission to the state attorney's office. Well, even if the state attorney's office says that's ridiculous, I'm not going to prosecute. The arrest has already been made, even though it's out of custody. And so those are the type things where we were talking about. We weren't talking about guns or anything like that. And there's also, you still have the lies about Nicholas Cruz and Promise, causing the whole massacre out there. And so the question is now, who is going to be looking out for our children while we come up with a promise, a promise 2.0? What will happen there, Doc, as far as making sure that it doesn't happen again?
Okay, and that's a good question, Madam President Ellison, and I do have concerns with that as well. But I'll tell you this: what we're being told is that students will receive appropriate consequences and interventions that are associated with the Alternative to External Suspension program, which is the AES. When we look at the 9, the 9 infractions that were under promise, according to what we're being told, is that there will be Alternative to External Suspension programs that will be provide similar intervention to students until a program is developed that would replace promise. So that's the information
that means absolutely nothing. That means absolutely nothing. That means they're gonna, continue to suspend. We had before promise, it was AES, Alternative to External Suspension. They were being removed from their home school, housed at an alternative site. There is no mechanism to get the child's homework to him or her prior to them returning. They were just housed and doing nothing but busy work all day. And you all know, and any of the educators know, if you pull a child out of their classroom for a large number of days, the chances of them catching up, being successful, and continue on lessons is highly unlikely. So what that means is absolutely nothing, quite frankly.
Right.
I mean, is there an audit? Is there an audit process that has begun or should begin on tracking how these children are being are punished as we go forward?
Okay, and Madam President, I'm not aware of an audit process for tracking the students, but I can tell you that the rationale that was given where it gained momentum in removing promise is that the current requirement is that the district issues civil citations whenever a kid goes into promise. So I think that was used sort of as a rationale to expedite the process in removing promise and bringing it forward to the board for a vote. But as far as an auditing process, I am unaware of that.
So a couple of things. Number one, the district could audit anything they want to audit. They could track that because everything has to be put into the system. So it's just a matter of the will to do it. And we will speak to the superintendent regarding that. There are several, I'm going to call them elimination of school to prison pipeline meetings that are coming up, and we'll certainly be there. But the reason that those promise incidences were being put into the system as in the JJS as a civil citation was not because of statute, but because of the school board policy that was put in place under Vicky, who, in an attempt to save her job, which was never going to happen, allowed them to do anything that they wanted to do. The staff also incorrectly shared at one of the elimination of school to prison pipeline meeting was that would be the end of civil citation. It is not. There will still be civil citations in the school, which was never meant to be, as the state attorney shared, and there will still be arrest, but there has to be a tracking system to track arrest and civil citation and discipline period in our schools, because there's a whole continuum. People act like promise is the only thing that was on, that was on the books. There's a whole disciplinary continuum that's there. So we're gonna count on you, Doc, to make sure that it goes on the record that we expect those incidents to be tracked as we go on, particularly since the end of Promise as we know it, and while we wait, because who knows how long something will be. And just remember that Promise as it was presented was not the Promise we came up with in 2010. It was post Douglas, and they changed it to be something totally different. So the punishment is it's based on, it's punitive nowadays, not how it was before. And I think we had a question that, how can parents maximize using school improvement plans to monitor academic success?
Okay, so the school improvement plans, those plans are normally, and I don't know how many parents attend the school advisory council meetings. But
Probably
they
not
do
enough.
So they do have school advisory council meetings. Usually schools have that on a monthly basis, and it's open to all parents. And one of the major role of the school advisory council at all the schools, and every school has one, is to continue to monitor the school improvement plan and to make sure that the plan is being implemented with fidelity. So I would encourage parents to find out when they have those school advisory council meetings, because it's open to parents, it's open for discussion, it's open for parental input, and so on and so forth. And any questions they have, the chair and the members of the school advisory council can also update them on the improvement plan and how it's being implemented within each school and within your school. So that would be a first step, Madam President, is parents attending the school advisory councils. There's a wealth of information that's provided that surrounds the school improvement plan at those meetings.
Okay, and someone is saying, one of our members is saying that the district-wide cell phone policy is not in existence in Western schools. Well, it's probably a lot more that's on the books that's not there. Someone else says that Hepburn said he got input from a pastor, but never named the individual who he spoke to. And someone else is saying that the next school board meeting is November 8th. The public can speak at 9:30 and at 5 p.m. You don't always have to speak. We need to increase our presence in support of our district, which is, God knows that's true. Go ahead, Doc.
Right, so Madam President, you're absolutely right. We do need to increase our presence. I will tell you, when we had the Promise program item on the October 17th meeting agenda, as well as the African American resolution, I visited several of our homeowners associations, and I encourage our residents to come out, as well as the community leaders. So I am going to continue to do that because I felt we needed more presence there on October 17th. I think that would have provided enough energy to probably sway some of the, the thinking of the board members. So when we come out in numbers, it is impactful. The board members sometimes will take that into consideration when they make decisions. So I personally would have wanted to see more of our residents and our community leaders out on October 17th. I believe it would have probably made a difference. So going forward, I'm just encouraging our HOAs, our residents to come out to the board meetings, especially when we have really important items on the agenda. I did make a lightning round to different HOAs to highlight that these two things are coming on the agenda. For example, I went to Broward Estates, I went to Kenlark, I went to Dorsey Riverbend, I went to East Sunrise Resident Association, and several others, to alert our residents as to what's coming on the agenda. That's really important. So I hope to see more residents show up, because this is when things like this happen, it's impactful to our children, and it's really important that we show up. So I would say just a word of encouragement to to make sure that we achieve what we need to achieve when items come on the agenda.
Thank you. One of our other members said the board recently changed how to sign up to give general public comments at the first regular school board meeting of the month, and how people can sign up to speak to individual items. It might be good to review the public, as the public is now expected to sign up to speak to items at least 2 hours before the start of the meeting.
Okay, so Madam President, what I will do, and I'm happy that you mentioned that, I will, as long as it's within all the school board protocol, I will have my office send out at least to the residents, the parents of District 5, how they can sign up to speak, and what the process looks like. So that way they understand, what to do. So I will have my office send that information out to, and I'm taking note of that, to our residents. So there's no guessing how you will be able to sign up to speak.
Okay, and I do want to say that we did have a time certain when we attempted to have one of the other discussion went over the, but that gave you a general idea. So so that's always helpful as well.
Yes.
I want to do some closing remarks here. Dr. Osgood, are you on the plane? Are you able to speak?
I'm here, Madam President, and thank you guys for a wonderful meeting. And thank you, Dr. Holness, for your leadership and what you're doing with the school district, community members that joined us tonight. Please, 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 let's support Dr. Holness and the school district and have a presence for our kids and get people to go and be present at these school board meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. And don't wait till it happens and then get mad and say, why nobody didn't do nothing. So I'm told that the agendas sometimes are out, a couple of weeks early, but they do make changes. So you have to keep checking. And Dr. Holness, your closing remarks, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. So like I said before, power is in numbers. So I do encourage our residents, when we have major items on the agenda that's impactful to our community, that you do your best. I know sometimes it's challenging, but do your best to show up at the board meetings, because the board does listen to the members of the public. So that's really important. I just also like to mention that in terms of the new social studies curriculum standards, as far as African-American history, there are several key people within our community with major concerns about this. Even our US VP Kamala Harris had considerable pushback on the Florida standards. So the resolution that came before us was very concerning to me. Still very concerning to me. And so I encourage all of us to be sure that you educate yourselves on these standards. And if you're concerned about how we teach history to our students, there are options available. And I thank so much Dr. Tamika Hobbs at the African American Research Library. She has on Saturdays, I believe, Madam President, lessons on African American history, where history is being taught from the right perspective. So I would encourage any parents who would like to ensure that your child or your children have accurate information on African American history, that you also make use of these resources in the community, such as the African American Research Library. On Saturdays, you can get information. Dr. Tamika Hobbs is conducting those as well. And there are, as far as I'm hearing, quite a few Black churches that are also teaching African American history in a manner that is more acceptable to the community. So that's very important. So I would say, Madam President, to our residents, please come out when we have items on the board that are impactful to you. It's really important because the board will listen to your voice as well. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And once again, I want to say, Dr. Holness, thank you for continuing to keep your word as you were on the campaign trail, to make sure that you keep the community informed and that you make sure that our voice is heard as you are on the dais. I want to also thank, I see several members of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. I see Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I saw Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I saw the NCNW Broward section, and I saw Golden Victor OES and a number of other organizations that work along with us. We have a lot of work to do, and everyone knows there's power in numbers. Those of you who have not yet joined the fight for freedom, the only thing missing from the struggle is you. Please go onto our website at naacpftlbroward.com. You can join, renew, donate, any of those things to make sure. And shout out to Bobby Dubose, who is the new Social Action Committee Chair for Fort Lauderdale chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity. He is smoking over there. He has delivered in the last 10 days, the first 30 members of his 100% commitment to have the chapter to join. And I must say, he's doing better than the Omegas next door, of which my husband is in. So, you know, I got to wear them out over there, but for his continued commitment to the association. As you know, he's no longer elected in office, but he's very busy, and we have to certainly make sure that that we keep it moving as far as in the right direction. Because as Doc was, we had a wonderful, if you haven't had a chance to check out our social media pages, either our YouTube or Facebook, Dr. Osgood in a speech talked about just us or just us. And that is it is no truer words have been spoken. So we want to make sure that everyone gets ready for 2024. I saw some candidates going to be coming up on there. Please make sure that you stay informed so that we can go make sure that we do the right thing for our children, for our communities. And with that, Minister Edwards, if you would please close us out.
Thank you, Madam President, and to all assembled. Let us go to the throne of grace. Eternal God, we are grateful to you, Lord, for what we have learned on this evening. Now, God, we pray that you would continue to be the wind beneath our wings. God, we ask for traveling grace for Dr. Osgood as she goes about the business that you have for her to do. Then we pray, God, that you would continue to crown Dr. Holness as he represents District 5 on the school board. We pray for the NAACP and for all concerned parties. God, help us to stand in these last and evil days and to speak, oh Lord, and to uphold your justice, your peace. We pray now, God, that you would bless us as we all stand in need of blessings. We pray now, Father, that as we prepare to depart from this call, but never from your presence, that you, Lord, would grant us your peace, your shalom, that you, Lord, would continue to give us the strength to stand. And God, that we may be found doing your will. In the precious name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.